So as we speak, there is an epic battle taking place. No, not over there, over here, over how $3.5 trillion will or will not be spent. And it's a battle that has life and death consequences for literally billions of animals, including human beings. And yet I don't see anybody in the American animal rights movement paying any attention to this, let alone doing anything about it. So your buddy over here on the other side of the Great Lakes is going to break this down for you, because this is very much a global issue, because we're talking about the fact that the earth is on fire here. I'm also going to tell you about some extremely good things President Biden has already done for animals, some extremely bad things he has already done or is about to do for animals and how we can stop them, and then extrapolate some bigger picture lessons about what a vegan voting strategy should be, no matter what country in the world you live in. Now, the good news is that the most powerful man on earth, the President of the United States, is actually on the right side of history here, on the animal side as it were, and finally wants to take the kind of massive action on the climate emergency and mass extinction crisis that scientists have been calling for all of these years. So who the fuck is standing in his way, and what can we do to make this happen? Well, standing in opposition to the president is the entire Republican Party. Not a single congressman or senator from the Republican Party has endorsed this plan. Now, Democrats control Congress and the Senate, so they should be able to push it through anyway, right? Sadly, there's just two senators in the Democratic Party who are not on board. That's a senator from West Virginia and a senator from Arizona. And this underscores, by the way, when I say that veganism is 100% a political issue, it doesn't mean that Democrats are perfect, that Republicans are the worst, although in this case they are making themselves seem that way. It's best explained by this little Venn diagram that I made, which for those of you who can't see, if it's not clear enough, on one side you have the good things that Democrats or left-wing parties do for animals. On the other side you have the bad things that Republicans or right-wing parties do for animals. And in the middle, in that gray area, you have good and bad things that they're both going to do. Well, we vote based on what's outside the center of that Venn diagram. And what's outside the center of that Venn diagram can equal millions, if not billions of animals' lives, as we're about to see here. And to think, this entire conundrum that we're having right now wouldn't exist if the Democrats had won just 2 more seats in the Senate. Had they won Maine or North Carolina, where they were very close, this entire bill would have already passed. It would have been history. America would have taken the biggest action it's ever taken, that any country has ever taken on the climate emergency already. But it's not a hopeless situation. I'm going to explain in a second how to get through to them. But first of all, I just want to explain, how is this an animal rights issue at all, for people who don't understand, for people who are still of the misconception that there's such a thing as environmental issues and animal rights issues, and the two have nothing to do with each other. As much as I think this should be blatantly obvious, based on the comment sections of my videos, I can see that it still isn't. So when we talk about the environmental crisis, who the fuck lives in the environment? Who lives in the wilderness? When we're talking about extracting toxic fuels, fuck the term fossil fuels, okay? Just like I always say, we eat animals. We're not talking about meat consumption, because vegans also eat plant-based meat. We're talking about consuming animals. Let's use more powerful and accurate language. Fossil fuels makes you think of, Jurassic Park, na-na-na-na-na. No, we need to describe them as what they are. They are toxic fuels. When you extract toxic fuels from the earth or from the ocean, they spill everywhere. They poison animals right there at the extraction site. When you transport them, they poison animals as they leak from pipelines. And then once you set them on fire, they go into the atmosphere. We all breathe them in. They accelerate the growth of cancer cells within every living being on the planet. Humans, caged animals, wild animals, domestic animals alike. That's breathing them in, but these toxins will eventually land from the atmosphere. They'll eventually land in the oceans and in the soils, where they'll poison our food, where they'll poison the food of animals, where they'll poison marine life. And that's just one facet of it. Of course, the actual climate emergency itself, overheating the planet, turning up the temperature, is causing mass extinction in and of itself, because it's causing drought across ecosystems in the world, it's causing floods across ecosystems in the world, it's causing one of the worst forms of death, which is dying by starvation or thirst for wild animals as their ecosystems collapse and fall apart. You know, when I talk about politics and animal rights, normally I focus on the more obvious things. So it's easy to understand how being in favor of shooting hibernating bears, like the entire Republican Party is, while the Democratic Party is opposed to it, is an obvious animal rights issue. Everyone can grasp the idea of shooting hibernating bears and how fucked up that is. But by far the biggest issue for animals when it comes to what's being fought over in American politics is the climate emergency. It's less sexy, it's less of an obvious issue, but that doesn't mean that animals aren't suffering and dying as a result. You know, I can't get the image out of my mind from one of the David Attenborough documentaries of elephants continuously searching for water as their ecosystem desertifies, and mother coaxing her baby elephants keep going because hopefully they'd eventually find water, and that baby collapsing from thirst, and the mother hovering over her baby, feeling those same emotions because elephants are people. And that story, that's one elephant mom, that's one elephant baby, but that's happening to lions, it's happening to every species of animals across the world. It's happening to polar bears as they're starving to death. So the climate emergency is an animal rights issue, and anything we do to reduce the extraction, the burning of toxic fuels is gonna help animals. Anything we fail to do is gonna be failing the animals. And I can't express how important this specific bill is, because this is going to be the last chance in the next 3 years, potentially the next 7 years, to make a big difference. That's because in American politics, whoever wins the White House generally loses Congress and Senate 2 years later. That's just the momentum of American politics. You can call it the physics of American politics. One side wins the White House, other side gets pissed off, generally wins back Congress and Senate. So this bill is possible now. It's going to be impossible after 2022. The Republicans are almost definitely going to win the Congress and Senate, meaning none of this has a chance in hell of passing. And it's very possible the Republicans will win the White House in 2024. If they win the White House, a Republican president will have veto power over any climate legislation. So now is the last chance. Now is when this needs to get done. Okay, so what is in this $3.5 trillion bill? In addition to hundreds of billions of dollars to address the climate emergency, it also has some of the things that progressive, that rational, that compassionate people have been dreaming of and demanding for years, which is funding for affordable housing to help with the homelessness crisis in the United States, funding for healthcare, funding for seniors and the elderly, and funding for better access to education, which is something America obviously needs badly. Where would all that money come from? Well, some of it, $35 billion, if we go with Biden's plan, would come from eliminating subsidies to toxic fuel companies. That's right. American taxpayers, which I was until very recently, are giving money to toxic fuel companies. You're giving money to oil companies, $35 billion in subsidies. Biden wants to cut that, and those savings won't go to this plan, but the majority of the money will be coming from raising taxes on billionaires and on corporations. So I think it's safe to say that Bernie Sanders was right. If this plan goes through, and even if it doesn't, you can see what the president is trying to do. Biden could be the most progressive president in American history. For those of you who think so, all politicians are the same, right and left wing, no difference, Biden's just like any other corporate Democrat, this is your opportunity to sit the fuck down, stop repeating the same false slogans that you've been hearing your whole life, and start paying attention to the world around you, because that's just factually inaccurate. This plan might as well be Bernie Sanders' plan. It might as well be AOC's plan, because it's got much of what the progressive Democratic Party wants. What, again, rational, compassionate people want. So, as I mentioned, 2 senators are in the way, particularly Joe Manchin from West Virginia. Now, he's opposed to this because West Virginia is a coal mining state, and he correctly predicts that were this to go through, the core of the spending on the climate emergency comes from eliminating toxic fuels from electricity generation in the United States, which means coal. So if you reduce the demand for coal, then that is bad in a sense for jobs in West Virginia. So that's part of his concern. Obviously, there's a lot that can be done for re-employment programs, and that's part of the plan itself, but that's Manchin's primary concern, because that's his constituents' primary concern. People in West Virginia don't want to lose their livelihoods in the coal industry. Now, that doesn't mean the plan is doomed to failure. It doesn't seem like Joe Manchin is going to budge on that issue because of how closely tied West Virginia is to coal. But the only good thing about the climate crisis is that it's such an enormous crisis that there's such a large number of things that we could do to solve it. We're not going to solve it overnight, and if attacking coal power isn't going to work in this particular moment, then there's many other things that can be done. And that's where, if you don't live in Arizona or West Virginia and you want to influence your congressman or senator to push this bill forward, you could be useful. You can talk to your congressperson or senator and push for alternatives to this. So I know most of my audience is already vegan or animal rights activists, so it goes without saying that helping transition agriculture in the United States from animal agriculture to plant-based agriculture can help do a hell of a lot to deal with the climate emergency. So that's something you could suggest. But to be honest, as much as you and I may know about this issue, that may seem like it's coming out of left field to a lot of politicians. They may not take that kind of demand seriously. That doesn't mean you shouldn't still put it on their radar. But what everybody understands is connected to the climate emergency and what is actually the biggest cause of emissions in the United States. You know, we always say as vegans that, animal agriculture causes more emissions than every car, truck, plane, and ship in the world combined. You've heard me say that before because it's true. But that's true globally. In the United States, transportation creates far more emissions than agriculture as a whole, plant and animal-based agriculture. So dealing with transportation, electrifying America's vehicles, is not going to be a threat to West Virginia. It has nothing to do with coal. It is going to do a hell of a lot to do with the climate emergency, and it's going to do a hell of a lot to reduce toxic pollution that we're all breathing in as we speak. I'm across the lake here in Toronto, but you know what? The smoke from the tailpipes in Detroit and Buffalo doesn't know that there's a border. My dog is breathing it in right now. It pisses me off to no avail. And you know, Americans are of course breathing in toxic pollution from Canada and vice versa. So I think potentially the best alternative, if we're not going to be immediately attacking emissions from electricity generation, is to double our efforts in dealing with transportation. And this is something I think everybody in the environmental/animal rights movement, because we really are the same movement, should be thinking about, because there's a massive advantage to reducing emissions from cars and trucks over from power plants, which is that the majority of people live in cities. We live concentrated in cities, which means we're concentrated here involuntarily smoking those tailpipes, those toxic fumes coming out of vehicles. As a result, people are getting asthma, they're getting cancer, and it's causing hundreds of thousands of deaths in the United States every year, approximately 7 million deaths globally, which is an enormous amount. First of all, life is priceless, so you can't put a dollar on that. But what you can put a dollar amount on is the amount of healthcare spending, the amount of money wasted to deal with the respiratory illnesses and the cancers that result from breathing in this pollution. So if we focus on dealing with toxic fueled vehicles first, on electrifying vehicles first, that means that first of all, we're lowering emissions, but second of all, or maybe first of all, we're saving people's lives. And as a result of saving people's lives, we are going to be saving money in healthcare. You save that money, you could put that money into dealing with emissions from electricity generation. Now, even if all of this fails for some reason and the climate elements don't make it into this plan, Biden has still promised to use his presidential powers as best as he can to achieve his goal of reducing emissions by 50% by 2030, which is huge. You know, we all wish it was 100% tomorrow, but the entire economy runs off toxic fuels. We can't shut them all down tomorrow without, starving to death and dying of thirst. So reducing half the emissions by 2030 is pretty fucking good. And he's going to try and use his presidential powers to do that. Which brings me to the question of the good and the bad that he's already done and how we can make a difference there. Now, I want this video to be primarily about this $3.5 trillion bill, because you need to take action if this is going to pass, and if it's going to pass with those climate elements included in it. But just really briefly, Biden has already canceled the Keystone XL pipeline. Fantastic. I talk about that at length in this video. He's already done a hell of a lot to reduce and eliminate the mining of toxic fuels from public lands, but he's also done something horrible recently, which is allowing for oil extraction from a massive area in the Gulf of Mexico. Huge fucking mistake. He's done some other things that are bad for animals, or is maybe thinking about doing them, and I'm going to speak about all that very soon in a video that's going to be focusing entirely on his presidential powers. Because right now we're talking about Congress and the Senate. We need to take action on this now, okay? Once this bill hopefully passes, with whatever is included, I'm gonna make a video focusing on what Biden can do within his power and how we can get through to him. Because obviously the president doesn't use Instagram, YouTube, so but that doesn't mean there isn't ways to get through to him via his cabinet members who do use social media. So I'll be speaking about that very soon. Make sure to subscribe so that you catch that. But get your senator on speed dial. Demand that they stand firm. Demand that they stand firm on passing climate action in this bill, whatever form that takes. Ideally for us animal lovers, we would like to see it tackling animal agriculture, at least funding the alternatives to animal agriculture. But helping electrify America's vehicles helps animals. I explained that, all right? We need to get action done. So that's enough for me. Go talk to your senator.